Hello, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Kaylin Goble Mathis, and I am a program coordinator and co-PI for OneOp. It is a pleasure to welcome you to today's session on From Clicks to Consequences, Understanding Youth Online Sexual Behavior. We would like to give you a brief tour of our webinar platform so you can find your way around today. Hopefully you are able to currently view the slides we're sharing. If you are unable to see them or have any other difficulties today regarding tech, please email us at contact@oneop.org for tech support. We hope that you continue to join us in engaging in the chat. Today, as service providers working with our military families, we welcome your insights to discuss your practice and expertise as we go through the session and want to hear from you. So to enable that chat pod so you don't miss any links or conversations, we will be sharing some really great links today. Simply place your cursor over that shared slides. You will then see a toolbar pop up across the bottom of your screen. From there, just click that chat bubble icon. And as many of you have already done, when typing questions and submitting those comments, please be sure to make sure everyone is selected from that drop-down menu so that everyone joining can view your comments and contributions in the chat. My OneUp colleagues will be monitoring the chat pod and providing links and resources throughout today's session. Also, note that the slides and resources we will be discussing are available for download on the event page for today's session. We will be covering continuing education details at the end of the webinar. So please stay tuned until I'm back on at the very end as I cover continuing education credits or if you're hoping to get a certificate of attendance for today. Closed captioning is also available for this webinar. You can turn on subtitles via the Zoom toolbar. If you need to step away at any time for today's session, please note that a recording will be available for review within 2 business days on the event page. So make sure to visit that event page as a one-stop shop for everything for today's session. We thank you for joining us as we continue our partnership with the Defense Department and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to expand the readiness, knowledge, and networks of the professionals supporting our military service members and their families. The views expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the official policy of the Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. government, or OneOp. The mention of any entity or products is for informational purposes only. And this webinar is part of our greater Sexual Behavior in Children and Youth series. You can find additional programming on the topic of problematic sexual behavior in children and youth on the series homepage. And today I am very pleased to introduce our speakers, Nikki Croteau Johnson and Curtis Brownlee. Nikki is a psychologist with over 24 years of clinical experience working with children, adolescents, and families in outpatient and forensic settings. She has specialty training in several evidence-based treatments and is a trainer in training for PSB CBT through the National Center on Sexual Behavior of Youth. She is a clinical director for the Problematic Sexual Behavior Program for children and adolescents at the North Carolina Child Treatment Program, where, in addition to providing direct clinical services, she oversees the implementation of statewide PSB programming. Curtis Brownlee is a licensed mental health therapist with over 17 years of clinical experience. Curtis maintains a robust private practice and provides supervision to newly licensed clinicians. He is passionate about evidence-based treatment and is also trained in trauma-informed cognitive behavioral therapy, CPT, and is a trainer in training as well for PSB CBT through the National Center on the Sexual Behavior of Youth. I will now turn things over to our presenters to begin today's presentation.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Kaylin, and welcome to everyone. I've been excited to see where everybody's from in the chat. It's pretty cool. So we've got Germany, Sweden, almost every state, so that's exciting. So let me get started here and move my... There we go. All right, so let's start out with our learning objectives for today. So what Curtis and I are hoping that you guys will gain through this particular webinar is really an increased awareness of how our youth are accessing online sexually explicit media. So how often, what it looks like, those kinds of things. We also are hoping you guys will really understand how these online sexual content impacts our kiddos' social and emotional health, particularly around your military connected youth. And then we're really going to be focusing a lot on techniques that you guys can utilize to effectively intervene when you've got a teen or a youth that is engaging in online problematic sexual behavior. So there's a few Defense Department policies that are relevant to our children and youth that are engaging in sexual behavior. So we just wanted to highlight these pieces for folks. Again, these are mainly in line with what we view across our kids with PSB is that we really want to be looking at integrated efforts, right? And we want to be focused on all of those community, family, and individual vulnerability and protective factors, right? So this is no different than youth that are not in military, but I think that this really gives a good grounding a section here so that you guys are aware that the Defense Department also has policies related to the sexual behavior in children and youth. And these also are from the DoD, and these are the standard elements for prevention for kids with problematic sexual behavior. Again, what we're really focused on is helping you as staff members, as front-facing folks that work with kids and families, to really support them in gaining the confidence and building those skills around having developmentally appropriate conversations with their children. And really from an early age, right? We talk a lot about with our clinicians and other providers around really scaffolding children's understanding, in a developmentally appropriate way. So again, thinking about respect for physical boundaries, healthy peer relationships, understanding what is consent, right? What does that mean? And then really supporting our parents and guardians and caregivers on how to build literacy around what's a safe consumption of media with their children. And we'll talk a lot about, how to help caregivers do a little bit of better job at supervising and monitoring and becoming sort of co-viewers alongside their kids. So I'm going to pause here for just a quick check-in. We'd love to have folks pop in the chat what type of professionals you guys are. What are you guys actually doing, your job titles, and anything that you're really hoping to learn today from this particular webinar. We'd love to give a couple of minutes for you guys to chime in on the chat around that. That would be great. Oh, thanks for moving the slide over. Okay, I'm gonna keep on moving while you guys are popping into the chat. All right, so what I'm going to start out with, you'll see that the webinar is sort of chunked into three particular areas, really just around how kids are accessing devices. We'll talk about sexting, we'll talk about pornography. So essentially what I'm going to do is give you guys sort of the lay of the land, what we're actually talking about here. And then Curtis is going to come in and really talk more about interventions and how we want to be working with kids and families around this. So what we know about access to devices, and some of this data is not going to be surprising to folks on this webinar, but we know that about half of our tweens, so our 8 to 12-year-olds, and the majority of our teens, our 13 to 18-year-olds have their own smartphone. And when I talk about smartphones, when Curtis and I talk about smartphones and electronics in general with caregivers, we really make sure that caregivers understand that a smartphone is a handheld computer, right? It's not just a phone. It's not that flip phone that I had 20 years ago that didn't have access to the internet, nor did it take pictures, right? We're talking about kids have their own sort of handheld computer with them at all times. Um, we also know that about half of our United States children get their first smartphone by the age of 11. We know that boys tend to use more screen media than girls do. We also know that our Black and Hispanic and Latino kids are using more screen media, and our kids from lower income households tend to use more screen media. While there's not any specific data on military youth and their access to devices, we could infer that they might have, at the very least, are engaging with screen media at the same level, if not more, than other kids are, just by virtue of them being in different places in the country or moving quite a bit and using devices more heavily than non-military connected youth. And you'll see in this large box at the bottom of this slide is that, and this is going to come as no surprise to anyone who works with caregivers, that the decisions about when to get a smartphone and negotiations about those rules and the boundaries around the smartphone else are really frequent sources of parental stress and family arguments. Um, so how else? A lot of this data comes from, you'll see at the bottom, there's the references are all at the bottom. So feel free, if I have folks that really want to do a deep dive on some of these, feel free to pull these up at a later time. But this is just a snapshot of technology in the home and what has changed from 2019 versus 2021. I think the biggest things that you'll notice is that smartphone usage has increased. Subscription streaming services have increased. And our satellite TV and cable has decreased, right? So again, most of these children in this 8 to 18 year olds are using smartphones and those streaming services pretty heavily. You'll see a little bit of a bump in the virtual reality headsets. That's improved a little bit more. It's a little bit higher now. But as that has come more on the market and more readily available to teens and their families. So what we know about how children and teens are interacting with their smartphones is on average, our kids around the ages of 8 to 12 are spending 4 to 6 hours a day watching or using screens. Teens, it's more around the 9 hours a day. We do know that non-school related screen time doubled during the pandemic, which makes sense, right? Because everybody was at home and on lockdown. So we know kids are spending quite a bit of time on their screens on a regular basis. When we think about screen time and military considerations, as I mentioned previously, while there's not specific data to the military population, I think that we could all agree that our military connected youth are probably using social media at a slightly higher rate. Again, by virtue of the fact that they are more transient, right? And they're using social media to connect with friends and family as they move, and those types of things. But we know that our kids are using it for social connection. We know that that kids are being affected by what they see online, right? And that's particularly true for our youth that lack stable support systems, which may include our military connected youth as they have their family members might be deployed or not around. They might not have as many of the support systems in place. Um, they may not understand the boundaries, right, around some of these virtual interactions. And that's part of what we'll talk about later on around some of our interventions. And again, we can't emphasize enough the early ongoing conversations about healthy boundaries with our kids at all times. So, and then just a shout out around for the support programs that many of you are probably a part of. But just wanted to shout that out that that's a very important section for your military involved youth, and then also our multidisciplinary team response. If at all possible, we want to make sure we're doing an MDT type response for kids who are engaging in problematic sexual behavior, whether that's in person or online. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this particular study that came out. It was done by Common Sense Media. It's called Constant Companion. It's a week in the life of a young person's smartphone use. And I'm going to highlight some of the pieces that I found most pertinent. But please feel free to do a deep dive on this particular resource. I think it's really helpful. So what they did for this particular study is they just had they monitored teens' smartphone usage to kind of see what they were engaging with and how much they were engaging. Again, I don't think this is going to be a surprise to folks, but the teens had their smartphones readily available throughout the day. That includes during school. Okay. It was picked up and checked frequently throughout the day with around a median of 51 times per day. Our younger participants was a little less frequently, but the adolescents were more likely to check their phone over 100 times per day. So that's a pretty high number of engagement with the phones. And Curtis will talk a little bit later about what sort of drives that engagement. But I want folks on this webinar to really be thinking about how are you engaging with your smartphone? How does that impact you? How much are you checking your phone daily during the day? So really think about that and then compare that to what our teens are doing. Again, during school hours, the majority of the kids had access to their phones and were using them for about a median of 43 minutes. I suspect there have been several states that have initiated um, uh, keeping smartphones out of the school. So I suspect we'll see some data maybe next year about what impact that might have had. I know that Curtis and I are in North Carolina. Our school system just started doing that, several different school systems in our state. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts. I see somebody popped in about Florida has also been doing that. So I think this will be an interesting thing to follow over the next year or so. Again, the majority of what teens are interacting with is social media, YouTube, and we'll talk about YouTube because YouTube is number one all day long for where kids are going to access material and gaming places. Amy, I somehow lost control. I don't see my control pieces. There we go. Thank you. Okay. So this particular figure is pulled straight from that constant companion I just talked about. So that just sort of shows you the increase in total entertainment screen use over per day from 2015 to 2021. So you can see how it's increased exponentially again over time. This one might be a little hard to read, so I'll try to hit the highlights. This is really showing you what the screen media activities by age are. So you'll see in the blue are our tweens, right? So our 8 to 12-year-olds, and our teens in that more purpley color. Um, so you can see that television is up there as well. Online videos you can see are a little bit higher for teens than it is for tweens, and social media as well is a little bit higher for our teens and our younger kiddos. You can see also virtual reality has started to increase just a little bit. But the majority of our teens are really using it for videos, television, and social media. So let's focus on social media for a minute and really think about how kids are engaging in that way via their devices. So the majority of our teens have used social media. with at least around 75% reporting one active social media profile. And over 50% of them are visiting these social media sites at least once a day. This is the latest data from 2024 from the Pew Research Center, and this just shows you where they are going to, what apps and sites they're going to. As you can see, YouTube tops the list all day long as number one for where kids are going. You'll notice TikTok doesn't show up until 2022. It didn't come online until a couple of years previous to that. So that's why you see TikTok sort of emerging right there. And as I'm sure it's not news to anyone, kids are not really going to Facebook anymore, y'all. It's TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. So that's where the majority of our kids are accessing things. I will say, I want to just let folks know to be on the lookout for some of the older chat platforms. We have run into a few of our kids in our program have been accessing older chat platforms like Omegle and some of those. And I'm not sure why that is, other than Omegle allows you to erase the messages pretty quickly. So I just want to say, even though these are the number one places that kids are going to, let's not forget that there are still some older chat platforms and things that kids might be accessing or bringing back online. Oh, yes, Omegle is back. We have had some issues with Omegle in the last couple of years. I feel like they're just, again, I think it might be mainly because it's very easy to erase messages and delete your content that you've been engaging with. I want to talk a little bit about generative AI. This is really in its infancy. So I will not profess to be an expert in AI, but I did want to let you know what we do know about how teens are engaging with AI. The majority of our teens are saying that they have used at least one type of generative AI tool. Um, and we're seeing that more and more in the schools. They're mainly using it for search engine functioning, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Chat bots is second, and then we have our image generators and video generators. I want you guys to just keep in mind, in the back of your mind, around image and video generators, this could potentially um, feed into the law, the federal law later on, and I'll talk about that more specifically, where kids might be using AI to generate a sexually explicit image or video. So I want you guys to keep that in the back of your mind as we move forward. That I think these AI generated images are going to become more of a problem as this gets more prevalent. So what we know about what kids are using it for is mainly to gather information, right? So that's the majority of what kids are using it for, is gathering information, helping them with their schoolwork, and also brainstorming ideas, mostly related, again, back to schoolwork and things like that. You'll see that 31% for making pictures and images. Again, as I just mentioned, I suspect when we run these numbers, when this Common Sense Media runs these numbers again next year, I suspect that will probably increase. That 31% for making pictures and images will probably be probably equal to getting information. So what types of, again, this generative AI types, this is a rapidly evolving field. So I would encourage folks to, we at in our program, once a month or once every other month, we do, one of us will do a quick search for any new things that are happening so that we are aware, because it's that rapidly evolving. So some of the things that are listed on this slide, there may be additional ones that you guys know of that we're not aware of, or they've just come online, or those kind of things. So, but for your chat bots and your text generators, That's going to be your Chat GPT, your Google Gemini, Snap's My AI, and Llama. For your image generators, we're seeing a lot of use with that DALL-E, the Bing image creator, or other Photoshop ones that have the Gen AI features attached to them. The video generators that we've seen more often is Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, or Google Video Poet. Um, yeah, somebody's already popping in with a new video generator that I haven't even seen as well. So again, search engines with AI generated results. As you guys may have noticed, anytime you get online now on your computer to search on Google or any of the other search engines, Bing, any of those kinds of things, they are now displaying AI generated overviews as their first search result. So I think folks should have started to notice that in the last few months or so that you're getting an AI generated overview. We've just added this in around AI companions because this has now started to pop up even more. AI companions are digital friends or characters that you can text or talk with whenever you want. Some of the example sites we've included here are Character AI, Nomi, Replica, ChatGPT, and Claude. So you can see that around 72% of the teens in this particular study have used AI companions. And you can see they're really using, yes, Alexa. We can't ever forget Alexa. They're really using it for that social connection and relationships, in addition to just as a tool, just to see what happens, right? Just to be curious and to ask about things, right? We do know that they're using about 21% are using AI a few times per week. And we do know that girls are more likely to use AI than boys are. I see there's a question about ways to turn off the AI generated feature. I'm pretty sure there are. You might just have to ask AI. Isn't that a interesting way to do that search? And I'm going to hand it off to Curtis here. So he's going to start talking about what teens think about AI.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. Yeah, let's talk about what do teens think about AI. So teens really have mixed feelings about AI, right? And so I'm going to go over some of those answers that we receive from teens about AI. So 77% of them feel like it can be used to cheat in school. Some of them feel like that it could help brainstorm ideas. That's about 71%. It could give inaccurate content to students. About 66% believe that. And it might be used to create bullying content, which is about 62%. So a little bit of mixed feelings there that they have around AI. Next slide, Nikki. Why is screen time so high, right? So our cell phones are recording data at all times, right? Our location, our purchases, our likes, and our shares. I know earlier this week I was looking for tires, and I'll tell you, ever since Monday, I've been getting advertisements about tires. I think I even got an offer about like a mechanic and all kinds of things, right? Our cell phones are recording this information. If you think about it, even back in the day, I can remember for me as an adult, right? I played Words with Friends. I played this game called Candy Crush. I don't know if those still exist. I took them off my phone because I found myself really being drawn to them, the notifications. And I was playing about, 10 people at a time, and they were nudging me and telling me, hey, come back. And so our kids are dealing with the same thing these days, right? Except for it's new games, it's new content. And a lot of times the content is designed for them to come back so that they can earn higher scores or even interact with their friends on the platforms. So the notifications definitely drive their engagement. On a typical day, participants might have 237 notifications, and they actually see about 46 and engage with 46 of those per day. So if you think about it for you all, like at the end of this presentation, think about how many notifications you'll have by the end of this presentation and how many of those interactions you're going to engage with as adults. And now think about that and probably multiply it at least by two for our kids because they have way more interactions and that's their primary way that they're interacting with each other. Okay, next slide, Nikki. So the impacts of screen time. So impacts are typically related to different domains. One is appearance and comparison to body ideals. The pressure to stay connected. So the different platforms that they're on, there's trends. There's things that's going on that's trending in schools. And so teens feel like they have to be connected so that they can know exactly what's the newest trend, right? If you have kids or know some kids or teenagers, and you at the end of this presentation you go up to them and you say 6'7", right? That's a trending thing now. I asked my 12-year-old and my 16-year-old what's trending, and if you just say 6'7", like that's a trending thing. So I had to dig a little deeper about, tell me about this trend, like what does that mean, right? It makes no sense to me still. It's just a thing that you say and it's funny. Absolutely no meaning, but they say it all the time, right? And so also they're getting that social engagement, that peer support. A lot of times teens are engaging on their cell phones, and that's how they identify having, friends and socializing. It's not that they're necessarily going face to face, but they actually engage through their cell phones. Also, there's exposure to bullying and harmful content. Sometimes teenagers and kids can just put comments on different platforms, and that can result in bullying, right? Just because they made a comment that maybe someone didn't agree on, or maybe they posted a picture or image of themselves, and that created some bullying, some harmful comments. So some of these negative impacts can be mediated through education if we're supervision and monitoring interventions. So if we have these creative and positive social uses of media, it's associated with a higher well-being. But that just takes a lot of supervision and monitoring and conversations with the teens and with the kids. Next slide, Nikki. So, what are some of those screen time interventions? We got to be proactive, right? We got to develop some clear rules and expectations, but we also have to follow the same rules. So, we can't set rules around cell phone usage and then our teens and our kids see us using our cell phone all the time. Even if there's valid reasons for us using our cell phones for checking emails, like teens don't necessarily understand that. And so there needs to be some general rules that are set around cell phone usage that everyone's adhering to, right? So have a device-free zone or device-free times. Even if it's saying for dinner time, we're not going to be on our cell phone. Often in times when I go out now, even in public, and you're at a restaurant, you'll see that everyone is on their cell phone, right? They're engaging. And sometimes in homes, people actually text each other instead of going to talk, right? If I'm upstairs and downstairs, my son, he'll text me and say, "Hey, can you do this?" And I'm like, "Hey, son, come and talk to me. I'm downstairs," right? So it's trying to set those boundaries around that and making sure you're adhering to it as an adult as well. You want to also understand what children and youth are looking at, right? So interactive and engaged co-viewing. Invite yourself to their world so that you can gain a good understanding of what they're looking at and what things mean. I talked about the 6'7" earlier, right? The only reason why I know about that is because I learned it from my kids. I want to tell me a little bit more about that, along with the other things that's trending. Inviting myself there and saying, "Hey, teach me, educate me about this." And oftentimes, the information that I learn from them, it helps me as I'm working with other teams because I'm actually aware now. So making sure you're understanding what they're looking at, even when it comes to these games, right? I think one of the popular games is Roadblocks, right? I want to understand roadblocks. I certainly spend enough of my money on Robux, spending the money for the content, but I want to know, what does this mean? Tell me about this. So my daughter walked me through and taught me all about it. And so that's really helpful. And it helps me to have conversations about how to look out for people who may be trying to be predators in a sense. Okay, next
And
slide.
Curtis, I was going to chime in because I didn't mention that before, but I thank you for mentioning the Roblox. I don't know about everybody else on the call. Roblox has been particularly problematic
Yes.
for our kids engaging with, sexual content via Roblox. We had a child last year who had generated Roblox characters engaging in sexual sort of situations. And then she uploaded that to YouTube and then that got flagged, right? So we're seeing Roblox is particularly problematic. as well as Discord. So I just wanted to put that out there because we didn't mention that before. So I'm gonna back on mute now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, next slide, please. So, some discussion points, right? What are some things that you can ask your kids? So, what is your favorite app, right? Just kind of figuring out, like, what's your favorite app that you like to use? I quickly learned that Facebook is not one. Nikki spoke on that earlier. Do not use Facebook. Most kids feel like that is an older platform, so they don't use that. But Snapchat, Instagram, like, they certainly are using that. That's really popular. Do you feel stressed or excited by it? Like, tell me a little bit about how you feeling and how does it make you feel? Does it feel like a work to stay up to date on everything? Some of these questions I've asked my teenager, and he certainly have alluded to the fact that being on the phone and keeping up to date on everything is exhausting, right? So these discussion points are really helpful to get a good understanding of what your teen is experiencing. All right, next slide, Nikki. So the Center for Digital Thriving, this is a resource and it's really, really helpful at it's a great resource on technology and it helps guide your conversations on technology. One of the things that I really like about this is on the side they have a part called Thinking Traps. And thinking traps just kind of help you understand some of those things that the teenagers are thinking around technology. So, for example, I should be getting more likes, otherwise, people won't like me. Everyone on social media is happier than me. They haven't texted me back, so that must mean that they don't like me. So, these thinking traps are discussed on this platform, and it's really helpful to help guide those conversations further with the teenagers. So it's a great resource, and I encourage you all to look at it. All right. And now we're going to Sexton. I'm going to pass it back to you, Nikki.
Well, that was a interesting way to pass that off, right? And now, Nikki will talk about sexting. Okay, so anybody have any thoughts or questions about what Curtis was covering as far as how to really engage your teens and your kiddos? I think one of the things that we really talk to our caregivers and other clinicians that we train regularly is that this should be a part of your initial assessment, right? Like these questions should be asked at initial assessment. Like how often is your kid online? Are you concerned about your kids' online usage? Do you know where they go? Do you know what social media platforms that they are engaging with? And so we try to really encourage clinicians that are working with kids and their families that this really should be a part of your intake, asking these questions. And then that way you can come up with a plan around supervision or monitoring or whatever rules or boundaries we want to put into place. So I just wanted to make sure that folks kind of thought about how you could start incorporating these questions into your current practice. Um, yes, and Kaylin put in the chat, absolutely. If you guys have questions, we would love to answer those for you. All right. So when we're talking about sexting, we really what we're the working definition we're focused on here is the sharing of sexually explicit images, videos, or messaging through electronic means. One of the things that we would have you all consider when you're talking to teens and particularly to teens, is to use their vernacular. They don't use sexting; they use sending nudes. Is really the language they use. So they don't really use that sexting term. It's really sending nudes. And when we ask our kiddos, do you know anybody who has sent a nude or received a nude? I would say about 100% of them will tell us they know of somebody who has received or sent a nude photo. The data down below here is from a couple of studies from a few years ago. I would suspect this number is a little bit higher than this, but they guesstimate around 20% of individuals under the age of 18 have sent a sext, around 35% receiving one. And the most problematic piece here is that last data point is that 14.5% forwarding a sext without consent. And so we're going to kind of talk a little bit more about how this works and the impact that this has on our teens and potentially legal ramifications for our teens. So one of the things that I really just want to ground folks in is that sexting is, part of modern dating culture, right? The majority of adults report, I think it was actually the number is a little over 90% of adults report sexting either during dating or courtship or during a committed relationship. And we're talking about consensual sharing when we're talking about that here, right? And it is somewhat related to higher levels of sexual satisfaction in relationships where there is consensual sharing of maybe, photos or sexy talk. That's what we use with the kiddos. With a consenting partner. Again, I want to highlight this is in consenting relationships. And yes, I saw the question about sending, and Curtis answered you, Jean. The question was, if someone forwards without consent, is that considered distribution of child pornography for the teen who sent it? Yes, it is. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. So what we do know about teens and their use of sending nudes or sexting is that the vast majority of teenage use is somewhat consensual, right? And I say somewhat consensual because depending on the state you're living in, the country you're living in, there may be different ages for the age of consent. But let's just go with North Carolina. Our age of consent is 16 in North Carolina. The majority of teen sexting is consensual. It is viewed as a fairly normal practice in their lives. And I highlighted that piece because I think for those of us who work with teens, it's a reminder to not go in and have this conversation and act like this is something that's so weird and bizarre that nobody's doing, because that's not true. Teens view this as a normal part of their lives. It's happening around them. They see it regularly. They hear about it. And so, again, as we talked about for device time and screen usage, I would be asking these questions at intake as well. What is your experience with sexting? What do you think about it, right? Teens are using it for sexual expression and exploration, right? They're also using it as a reinforcement of their body image, as a way to form and maintain relationships, and to experience that sexual excitement and enjoyment. Remember, teens are, they're going through puberty right now. They have very poor frontal lobe function, so they're not making good decisions, right? And so this particular area is ripe for kids to engage in some pretty negative interactions in this way. And we can also think about, we'll talk about it in a more detail in a minute, right? Like teens who are engaging in these activities with folks that they don't know online, right? I think somebody had put in the chat earlier about kids and friends, teens and friends, right? And that they don't often have real in-person friends, right? Like we're asking them, okay, how many of these friends? I was thinking about a kid I just did an assessment with, and I asked him how many friends he has, and he said 100. I said, how many of those friends have you ever seen in person? You physically touched them, seen them in person, and he said two. Okay. And I think folks are used to hearing that most of these kids might not have these as in-person friends. And I think this is increased in your military connected youth, right? Because of the way that they move around and things like that. So for having these conversations, we should be asking, like I mentioned, about our adolescents' personal experiences around sexting. So as I mentioned, we would want to be asking, have you ever sexted? Have you ever received a nude photo? Have you ever sent a nude photo? Have folks asked you for nude photos? How do you feel about that? Those kind of questions. Curtis is going to cover some more in-depth questions later. But we really want to highlight that we want to be using a curiosity-based approach when we're talking about youth sexting behavior, instead of a sort of punitive or negative approach. We want to sort of align with our teens and understand what their personal experience is with sexting. So what about the images? I've been alluding to this all along, that we would get to some of the legal ramifications of the images. And for lack of a better word, it's complicated, right? And so one of the first things that I want you to notice here is that there is an international sexual exploitation image database, and that is a law enforcement investigation tool. And so originally this database and the whole idea around child sexual exploitation and being able to capture these images and know when somebody might be abusing a child or things like that was all based on thinking this was done by adults generating images, right? So it didn't occur to everybody that, oh, this might include youth produced images, right? Not in the context of abusive relationships or exploitive relationships, okay? And so, in fact, they went back and looked at the archives, and in fact, youth produced, self produced youth images comprised 40% or more of all of the images in the archive, right? And I think that was surprising to folks because, again, this was really designed to capture, right, those adult child sexual exploitators, right? So this finding really prompted researchers to reevaluate how we're going to use our terminology and what we should be using to capture this more accurately. So sort of decriminalizing consensual sharing while really focusing our efforts on exploitive and abusive behavior, right? So it might be better to use sexting in consensual relationships versus the child sexual exploitation images. But what does federal law say? So images of child pornography are not protected under First Amendment rights, and they are illegal contraband under federal law. It's important for all of you guys to be familiar with your state laws because they may also apply. But the age of consent for sexual activity in any given state is irrelevant for federal law. Any depiction of a minor under the age of 18 engaging in sexually explicit conduct is illegal all day long. And federal jurisdiction almost always applies when the internet is used. And that is because when you send a photo via, if you send a photo via your phone, right, it is oftentimes crossing state lines because of the IP addresses, right? So that's what makes it a federal crime because it doesn't just stay, quote unquote, in North Carolina per se or in Texas per se. It is sort of in the ether, right? So I wanted to make sure that we're aware of what our federal law says. The legal definition, kind of going on here, of sexually explicit conduct, I want to make sure you guys are clear that it does not require that an image depicts a child engaging in sexual activity. It could be a picture of a naked child if it's just sort of sufficiently sexually suggestive, right? That could still constitute illegal pornography. And this would include images created, adapted, modified, but appear to depict an identifiable actual minor. So presumably AI generated images and deepfakes would fall under this. And Sharman, I see your note there about self-produced does not necessarily exclude coercive components. You're absolutely correct, and I'll sort of show a slide from Finkelhor's study around that that should cover that piece. But remember, I mentioned to you guys earlier to sort of flag that AI piece. So we're gonna assume that some of these AI generated images and deepfakes would start to fall under the federal law as it relates to this. For the military criminal investigative organizations, I did pull this particular slide for folks who are interested. Um, but the service MCIOs, including the CID, NCIS, and AFOSI, have overall investigative responsibility for cases that meet the threshold of a criminal offense under the UCMJ. But typically, every covered offense has its own dedicated enumerated article, and that's with the exception of the standalone offense of child pornography, which is included as a provision of Article 134. So, because it's under Article 134, child pornography cases are uniquely subject to theories of prosecution that might rely on state law as well. I've included the relevant resource in UV Hayes, United States v. Hayes, for those folks who wanted to take a deeper dive on that. So these next two slides are just sort of showing you kind of where we've moved from. So child pornography to child sexual abuse material, CSAM, right? To we've noticed that some of these are youth produced images. And so maybe we want to be thinking about, is this image based sexual abuse or image based sexual exploitation and abuse of children? Again, one of the things I'm going to pause before I get to this sort of heavy slide next is I want folks to consider when an 11 or 12-year-old is going to go online and search, right, for somebody that they might be interested in, or for, looking at sexy pictures, per se. A 12-year-old is not going to search for images of 50-year-old women or men, right? They're going to search for images of people that look like them, which are going to be children all day long, right? So I think the idea here is, and I see a couple of things in the chat. What I'm not suggesting is it's okay for kids to sex. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is we need to focus our efforts on the harmful image sharing that kids might be engaged in versus what would be more considered consensual or normative if it's not impacting them in a negative way. And Finkelhor and his colleagues in 2023 sort of put out this article where they really wanted to look at what might be categories that we could focus on. All day long, you can see on the left, those adult produced images. Those are going to be ones that we really want to focus a lot on, right? Those are the ones that the original laws were created around, is adult predators, right? Seeking out children or taking images or sharing images in that way. So keep that in mind. So when we move to the right part here, we're focused on those youth produced images, right? And so thinking about when we want to be concerned about youth produced images, we want to be thinking about these categories where a youth might be taking or making an image non-consensually. That's what that NC means on the star, by other youth. So that means those like ambushing, upskirting, right? Taking a photo underneath a skirt of someone when they're not looking, underneath a bathroom stall when they're not looking, setting up a phone, a camera in a room where self-care happens and the person doesn't know that, right? We've had several, we actually had a case here in North Carolina at NC State University where a student had placed several cameras in locker rooms and bathrooms. And so, again, and created images based on that. So all day long, we are concerned about that and we're going to intervene. We also are wanting to focus on those images where a youth may have started out consensually, but then the youth shares that consensually shared photo non-consensually with other folks, right? So that revenge porn, you broke up with me, so now I'm going to share your picture with everybody I know. Sextortion, if you don't send me a nude photo, I'm going to tell your parents that you failed your math test. Those kinds of things. I will say sextortion, we recently codified sextortion in North Carolina a couple of months ago. So we now have a new sex law that is specifically around sextortion. And so that's just a reminder for those of you to make sure that you're up to date on what sex laws are in your state or your area that you need to be aware of. Um, and then again, any of our voluntary illegal sharing with an adult, right? So if our kids are sharing nude photos with adult predators because of grooming or sexual exploitation, those types of things. These are the images we really want to be focused on. I'm not sure that we want to be in the business of criminalizing two 17-year-olds that might have been sharing a photo consensually versus somebody who has taken a photo non-consensually or shared photos non-consensually. So again, I just think it takes a more thoughtful approach when we're thinking about these images and how we want to deal with them. I'm going to hand off to Curtis now.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. So let's talk a little bit about the impacts. And Nikki have mentioned a lot of this, but we know that those negative impacts are predominantly related to the non-consensual sharing of those images, right? Several other teams that I work with in my practice, they come in and that's what's happened. Exactly what Nikki said. He broke up with me, angry, and so now that those images are being sent out or videos are being sent out. And some studies even suggest an increase in cyberbullying. Next slide, Nikki. So let's talk about the interventions, right? How we can be proactive. So one of the things is to incorporate the sexting discussions within the context of sexual health education, right? Before that maybe wasn't the case, but because it's so prevalent, we have to incorporate those discussions. In my practice, when I'm working with teens, I'm talking about that and I'm doing it in a way that's not that fear and shame-based strategies, right? I'm coming alongside them and we're talking about it and talking about how to navigate some of those tough situations, right? Education should be focused on consent. Nikki spoke earlier in our state, the age of consent is 16. Teaching teenagers about consent, teaching kids about consent and what that exactly means, right? How to say no and that they have the right to say no. And it's tricky because oftentimes it's not saying no face to face, it's saying no via text message or over the internet, right? And so teaching them how do you navigate that and how do we get you to develop some stronger decision making skills around this. So why is this person asking and why do I want to share? Often in times, I will walk them through the possible associated consequences if they choose to engage in that behavior and share images and send images and what could happen. And just really having that discussion to help them see where it could go. You have some teenagers that's going to just take it upon themselves to do whatever it is that they want to do, and you maybe can't control that. But I still have conversations about at least blurring your face because this could truly impact you in the future. So if you're doing this and sending images to people, even if it's not a nude or explicit image, it's just some image, at least blurring your face so that it can't be used against you. Because another thing that we're seeing now is that the AI features can now be used to help create images that you didn't send. So they can make it appear that you're nude and it looks realistic. Next slide, Nikki. So other discussion points and some examples of that is how do we decide if someone is safe and trustworthy? Like, let's have discussions about that. Let's focus on behaviors and actions. If you're dating someone, like, how do we know that person is trustworthy? How do we know that they're safe? Right? Do they have a history of, sending images after a breakup or doing things of that nature, right? We can help them generate a list of trusted persons and have discussions around what makes those individuals trusted. We often in times, Nikki and I, and it's always been very powerful for us when we're running groups and working with teenagers, we will use like popular media to generate discussions, right? At least 3 times out of the week, there's something going on in popular media that relates to some of these things that we're talking about. And so the teens and kids can really hone in on that and it's relatable and it makes sense to them. Next slide, Nikki. Your photo fate is a great resource from NetSmarts. It's digital safety lessons, and they have tons of videos that teach lessons. So I encourage you all to look this up, but it's a really great resource and discussion guides. Next slide, Nikki. All right. So again, talking about interventions and responsive, right? So with adolescents, you want to seek that collaborative approach, right? I'm aligned with you. I'm curious and I'm with you. And I want you to tell me a little bit about what's going on, right? So they want to feel listened to. They want you to respect their autonomy and their choices. And so the way you're doing that is by coming alongside them. You're not doing the victim blaming, right? Often in times, I had caregivers go to the place of, well, you shouldn't have been on the internet and doing that in the first place. You shouldn't have been sending that. Even when there are situations where the child or the teen was exploited by an adult, right? And they had tactics that they used to get the kid and lure them in. And so making sure that you're not doing the victim blaming, and acknowledging the impact and distress that it associated with it. If you have to, assist in notifying appropriate authorities in case of non-consensual sharing. As Nikki was talking about, like there's been plenty of times that we've had to help with that and walk through that process. And to answer your question, Kaylin, have you ever facilitated discussion like this in a larger youth group settings, like your photo fate? Yes, we've done it all the time. When Nikki and I have run our problematic sexual behavior groups, like we've had larger discussions around this. And again, that proves to be really helpful because the teens are learning from each other as opposed to hearing it from Nikki and I, and they can generate good discussion around that. Having a supervision plan if PSB is exhibited. So this is important. So a supervision plan, you may consider the use of technology, changes in the daily routines, having visual supervision in place for safety. And so these plans are created by members of the MDT, such as the DODEA and the CDP YP. Next slide, Nikki. And then Take It Down is another great resource. And so Take It Down is a resource that can help remove those online news that are out there. It can help track it down, and help remove any of those news or partially news that's up there, or even just sexually explicit photos. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Curtis. And I just wanted to say out loud what I put in the chat around, I want folks to keep in mind, right? Like kids these days are used to having their photo taken without their consent from an early age, right? Caregivers document everything. Now that everybody had the access to cameras, right? Kids are desensitized, right, to having their photo taken without permission. And so it's going to require, right, these conversations around consent, and when it's okay and not okay for someone to take your photo, and that it's okay for you not to want someone to take your photo, right? Like Curtis highlighted, is really getting kids to understand that you have bodily autonomy. You have the right to say no to what you want to say no to, right? So I just wanted to highlight that particular comment I put in the chat. So let's talk about pornography. Before I go kind of dive into pornography, I want to just, one of the caveats we always say is this particular part of the presentation is not meant to be pornography shaming. The point of this presentation is that what consenting adults do in their lives is what consenting adults do in their lives. Our argument here is that pornography should not be used as a sexual education tool for children and adolescents. And so that's essentially what they're using it for. And so it's very important for us as professionals that work with kids and families to understand how they're interacting with it and what they think about it. So what we do know is that by the time our kids are around 10, this data is a couple of years old. It suggests around 15% of our 10-year-olds have already been exposed to pornography. I would argue this is probably higher in the 35 to 40% by the time they're 10. It's just too incredibly easy to stumble upon sexually explicit material online. And you guys can think about how many times in the past month you have Googled something and got something returned to you that you had no intention of ever wanting to look at or view in any way, shape, or form. So you can imagine how easy it is for a kiddo to get unintentionally exposed to pornography. You can see that number increases exponentially as our kids get older. So by the time they're 17, the majority of those kids have been exposed to pornography. Another piece I want to highlight, and when we're talking about pornography, we're talking about online websites, right? We're not talking about, when I first started doing this work 25 years ago, we were worried about Playboys that kids found in the bathroom or Penthouse magazine, or my all-time favorite, if anybody on here is old enough to remember, the good old Sears catalog, where my kids were cutting out lingerie photos out of the Sears catalog. That's not what we're talking about now. We're talking about very violent, explicit sexual content that these kids are getting exposed to. Um, Again, the piece that I want to highlight here is that the vast majority of pornography viewing at first is unintentional. They accidentally stumbled on it. It was delivered to them accidentally. It was unintentional viewing. Okay. These slides are pulled again from the Robin Mann study in 2023, and this will kind of show you how teens have interacted and accidentally seen pornography. So again, just in total online exploration, the more you're online, the more you're going to get exposed to inappropriate content, regardless of what that content is, right? Clicking on something, but you didn't realize it was pornography, right? I think there was some comments in the chat after I said Roblox was problematic, right? Who in a million years would have thought that I could have clicked on in something in Roblox and that would have been sexually explicit, right? So it's really just not knowing what's out there, right? You will see that kids are interacting and looking at pornography during the school day. Make no mistake that the majority of school computers do not have controls on them in the same way that you can put controls on your own computer. So oftentimes, if we have a kid who is engaging online very problematically with pornographic materials and things like that, oftentimes we will, if they have to bring their school computer home and they don't need it when they bring it home, we'll have the parent lock that device up and give it back to them in the morning. If they need the school computer, oftentimes we will recommend that they hardwire that into the big screen, like a large TV screen, so you can watch and hear and see what your kid's engaging with on that school computer. So what are they looking at? What does the research tell us? Fortunately, there are other people that look at pornography and sort of code what kind of pornography there is out there. I'm glad that's not my job. But what we know is that the majority of pornographic content online includes aggression. And over 70% of that includes males as the aggressor. Even more problematic is the majority of the response by the receiving human when they are receiving aggressive, violent sexual acts towards them on pornographic materials is neutral or pleasure. So you can imagine that could be super confusing to kids and teenagers to see two adults engaging in violent sexual activity and the one adult is responding with just a neutral face or just a pleasurable face. That can be very confusing. This particular study again asked teens what they were looking at. More than half of them said they had seen the violent or aggressive pornogaphy. Many of the teens, but at the same time, they are reporting, right, that it's giving them helpful information. And again, they're not talking to people about pornography. There was a study done a couple of years ago that showed that not only were teens not talking to their caregivers about pornography usage, they're also not talking to each other. So that's even more problematic. Pornhub is particularly one of the most trafficked websites in the states. Several states have outlawed Pornhub, or not outlawed Pornhub, but Pornhub previously did not have age verification. They don't have age verification on their website. Several states, including North Carolina, have required that Pornhub put age verifications in place, and Pornhub has declined to do so. So in many states, you can't, and I'm putting air quotes, you can't see me, but that you can't access Pornhub. However, there are ways to VPN around that. So just be aware of that. This just gives you a sense, the slide, of how much visits there are to Pornhub. This is from 2019, so it's a little bit older. But there were 42 plus billion visits to Pornhub, and around 6.83 million videos are uploaded yearly. So it's big business. These are the most searched for terms that you will see from 2024 on Pornhub. Interestingly enough, Pornhub does a really good job of doing their own year in review, so you can kind of see. The reason why I'm showing you these is because I want you to see how a lot of these video games and movies and characters are very kid centric. So it could be very easy for a kid to kind of get sucked down the rabbit hole, looking at, Spider-Man or The Incredibles, engaged in, you name it, any character or anything can be done into a sexually explicit video or meme. So I just want to highlight that there's a lot of, kid-friendly language that can be searched for in these pornographic websites, and that can be very confusing to kids. This is for Gen Z, and I put this in basically because we could extrapolate that potentially some of our younger kids are also looking at it in this way, the difference in the relative categories. You'll see a huge increase in vertical video. If you don't know what that means, it means that kids nowadays aren't taking videos of themselves with the phone sideways like us old heads do. They're doing those vertically. So that's what vertical video means. This just shows you the traffic by phone, desktop, and tablet, and by game console, right? So the majority of kids are interacting via their phones and via game consoles, with PlayStation 5 kind of boosting up the race there. So I'm going to hand it off to Curtis to talk about what teens think about pornography usage.
All right. Thank you, Nikki. Next slide, please. All right. So when we think about this, the teens are reporting that they feel okay about the amount of online porn they view, and that's at about 67%. So 50% of the teens who felt okay about the amount of porn they view, they also felt guilty or ashamed after watching. All right. Next slide, Nikki. So here, I highlighted some of the really high numbers here. And so the teens who say they have learned the following things from watching pornography, right? So how to have sex, that's at about 79%. What type of partners they find attractive is at 72%. About human bodies and anatomy is at 79%. And what types of sexual behaviors are likely to feel pleasurable to a sexual partner is about 73%. So pretty high in terms of what they're saying they are learning from online pornography. Next slide, Nikki. So the risk of online sexual education. So children are exposed to inaccurate and unhelpful information, right? We know this. Nikki and I experienced this in our groups with some of the things that the teens report to us. They are learning it from these pornography sites and watching it. And so we have to correct them on a lot of this information during our groups. So youth who are less likely to have adult support around healthy relationships, they often seek this information on sexual health and sexual behaviors, and they look for more interpersonal connections online compared to other youth. Okay, next slide, Nikki. When we look at the impacts of pornography exposure, so the majority of the research is correlational, so meaning that we can't prove one thing causes the other. When we talk about is pornography addiction real, so there's no diagnosis in the DSM-5 for pornography addiction. People experience addiction-like symptoms, but there's actually no diagnosis in the DSM-5, right? And so therefore we call it problematic use of porn. The more you view pornography, the more realistic they find it. It relates to more positive attitudes towards casual sex, so hooking up. I talked to two teenagers this year, and one of the things that they revealed to me that I thought was really interesting is that this their senior year, and so it's almost like a game that they're playing, and they seeing how many bodies they can catch. That's how they refer to it, right? So just casually hooking up, but throughout their senior year, it's how many bodies can they catch? How many individuals can they have sex with? Right. And those individuals have also, indicated that they watch porn and they've been watching porn for quite some time. So it also may impact the youth's ability to find satisfaction in healthy consensual relationships. So when we talk about teens watching pornography, the other thing that we're seeing is that they see people as sexual objects, right? So I talked about that casual sex, just hooking up. Um, no protection, so not actually protecting themselves, having you know, proper protection, and they have distorted beliefs about consent. So not really understanding consent and how important it is. Next slide, Nikki. Oh, I'm sorry. I went over that one. The next one. Okay. So when we talk about interventions in education, so we want to acknowledge the discomfort, right? It's really tough for families and caregivers to talk about these with their child. And sometimes it's hard for the teens to talk about it. So when you involve the caregiver, you want to understand their family and their cultural values, right? Incorporate these pornography discussions within the context of sexual health education, just like we said for sexting, avoiding that fear and shame-based strategies. And teens report that these conversations help them understand alternative ways to learn about sex and sexuality. Take the curiosity-based approach. And so if you see the savvy consumer, it gives you information. This is a great resource, and it gives you information on how to work with teens with porn use or other sexual behaviors. All right. So some of those discussion points, right? Having these discussions are helpful. So do you know what pornography is? Right? Have you ever seen pornography? What do you want to know? And what have you heard that you aren't sure about or you don't understand? And what are your friends saying about sex and pornography? So generally, those questions can help guide a lot of discussion around pornography. How do you feel about the content that you see? Are you concerned about the amount of time you're spending looking at pornography? So again, engaging in these conversations help open it up, and it also can help the caregivers learn what they can say to their teens to have these discussions. Next slide, Nikki. This is a huge one, and I think Nikki and I do this every time we run our groups, right? It's highlighting that pornography is entertainment, it's exaggerated, right? They're paid actors. Many of these individuals, they don't engage in the same behaviors in their personal relationships. So, also talking to them about how pornography can often have violent and abusive images, right? It's not how real relationships work. Discuss that images showing under 18 years of old age is actual child sexual abuse. And so Nikki spoke to this earlier, where we'll have teenagers often look up child pornography, but they're looking for individuals that's around their age. And so therefore it triggers that they've actually accessed child pornography. Talking about how real relationships are more complicated, and then also when we talk about like homemade porn, letting them know that also homemade porn that they see that are on websites is still an exaggeration, right? It's still not a real relationship. Again, education needs to focus on consent, the right to say no and how to say no. Engage teens in a conversation related to healthy relationships. So what is healthy relationships? What does that look like? What does it mean to be in a satisfying, healthy relationship? Decision-making skills, helping them learn those decision-making skills. And this conversation is ongoing, right? We have to talk about this. And sometimes you may find yourself having to have conversations with caregivers about healthy relationships because they may not have modeled that for their kids. And so you have a bigger barrier to get through. We may have to start with some caregiver psychoeducation and just working through with them about what healthy relationships are and how do we convey that to their teens. So when we talk about some of the interventions and supervision, So you want to make it a habit with changing the passwords frequently. So if you're trying to stop teens from accessing pornography or inappropriate websites, you have to change passwords frequently. They are smart. They know ways to get around accessing things on technology, right? Consider projecting the school computer on a large screen. So nowadays, a lot of schools require kids to use their tablets, to use their computers. So a way around that is have it being projected on a larger screen so that you can monitor that when they're on there doing their homework. Um, Dickie spoke about this earlier that kind of talked about like the older days we had these flip phones, right? I understand how important it is for teens to have phones so parents can talk to them, but they can certainly have a device that doesn't have access to the internet, right? So one of those older flip phones so that they can make calls on it, but they can't necessarily access the internet. And those devices are still available at certain locations. So those are really important things to consider when you talk about supervision and monitoring.
Thank you, Curtis. I know we're rapidly running out of time, so I just wanted to highlight some of the resources that Curtis and I use regularly in our program. Um, the digital birds and bees. Again, we're big believers in using, whether we like it or not, how much kids are interacting online. This is how they. This is how they interact. So we will try to utilize multimedia if we can. That tends to grab kids a little bit better. So digital birds and bees is a great one that you can utilize. I encourage everybody to, if you want to do a topic, just go ahead and do a search and see what's going to work best for you and your teen. Um, What's Okay is a magnificent website where kids can go to and ask questions. You can do this interactively with a teen or have a caregiver do this interactively with a teen. Oops. Here we go. Oops, I went too fast, y'all. Uville, we're not familiar with this, but one of the folks on here, they were, and so it looks like a really cool website. So I think anytime, like I mentioned, we can use multimedia, attention grabbers to teach things. That's really where we need to be at with our kiddos. Online safety, I want to highlight this one, the Connect Safely. This one you can actually go in and search by social media platform, those kinds of things. So if you're really worried about how do I block Roblox or whatever, it goes into detail about each specific of the type of phone, all of that stuff. NetSmarts, which is also through NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, has some really cool interactive video games and things like that. Um, Let me see. There's also Thorn. So there's a variety of online safety websites that you can use that could be really helpful. So I'm going to leave it here and see if we have any questions or anything else that folks have.
I am wondering if you have any suggestions for folks who may be kind of in spaces that they don't have that robust in-person network. They may be in more in rural spaces or be moving from if someone is military connected and has like PCS coming and they're used to being in a more resource available area and then move to somewhere that isn't as available for resources or for practitioners. If you have any kind of suggestions for that. We did have a note just come in regarding therapeutic resources for a family relocating and having struggles with figuring out resources for them.
Yeah, I would have a couple of suggestions. One is you can go to the NCSBY. They do have a link to search for trained providers in the country. I do know there are some in Texas. I don't know Texas very well, so I don't know if they would be near that particular town. The other thing that you can do is also reach out to your child advocacy center or your CAC in that particular area, and they may have some resources or other places that they could sort of guide you on. But yeah, that's where I would suggest, Kaylin.
Thanks, Nikki. It looks like we have time maybe for one or two last questions. I will note in terms of the child advocacy centers, they are doing a really wonderful job of kind of codifying those MOUs with local military installations and bases. So they are doing a really wonderful job. And we have a webinar on that from July. So please be sure to check that out if you're looking for more about those relationships and localized relationships with children advocacy centers. And let me look and see if we have any other questions. We did have one question about engaging with parents who do like to post their children's information and create social media profiles, even if the child is aware of it, including their names and birth dates. I think you covered a bit of that, but just wanting to see if you have any additional suggestions for folks having conversations with caregivers or parents about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think usually we take the tact that, that we all have the same goal in mind, right?
Mm,
Is to raise a healthy human being, free of harm and abuse, right? And because we live in such a digital world now, we're going to have to help your kid understand how to navigate this. And I think when you start from that space and then kind of have the caregiver go, oh, well, maybe it's not a good idea for me to take a photo while they're using the toilet, right? So, like, really engaging them in that conversation.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. And one last question I'll just note. I know I see a question come through regarding, and I will be covering continuing education credits in one moment regarding early intervention for older children or teens who may be experiencing those like problematic thoughts. And more along the lines of having those feelings for maybe like younger age ranges. I would recommend looking into Johns Hopkins. I know they are doing quite a bit, Dr. Elizabeth Letourneau and her team around that specific topic area. They have a lot of resources and programs that they have going on regarding that. So I would recommend looking at Johns Hopkins for kind of more information regarding that. Wonderful. Alrighty. Well, we will go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Nikki and Curtis. What a wonderful session. I will also just highlight that was a lot of great information. I think a lot to marinate on. So this, excuse me, this session again will be available for on-demand viewing within 2 business days of us concluding today's session. So please make sure to visit that for the recording if you would like to kind of revisit all of the great information discussed today. Our next 3 slides are just citations. I know we had quite a few questions regarding some of the studies and citations. All of these citations are available at the bottom of the additional resources page. So again, please make sure to visit the event page and click on additional resources for all of the resources both shared as well as our citations for Nikki and Curtis today. And finally, we are, of course, offering our continuing education credits. 1.5 continuing education credit will be available for today's session from the American Association for Family and Consumer Sciences, the Patient Advocate Certification Board, the Commission for Case Manager Certification, the National Council on Family Relations, the National Commission for Health Education Credentialing, the University of Texas at Austin School of Social Work, as well as, of course, certificates of attendance for any additional tracking for professional development hours. The link to the evaluation is available on the event page. When you visit the event page, you will see a purple button like the one currently on the screen. Please click on that and it will take you to both the evaluation first and then the post test. If you do not see this button, and especially if you have had the event page pulled up as we recommended since the beginning of the webinar, please refresh or exit out and reload the page and you should see that button populate. Your feedback is important to us, so we do ask that you take a short evaluation, letting us know your thoughts on today's webinar. And for those wanting to obtain those CE hours after the evaluation, you will be directed to a list of opportunities offered for today's webinar. Once you complete those steps, which may of course include that post test and fill out your name and email, your certificate should be emailed to you. Some email addresses will direct that certificate to your spam folder, especially if you have not received a CE from us before. So please make sure to check your spam folder. within 24 hours of completing the process. If you have still not received that, please email us at ce@oneop.org. That email is also listed on the slides if you need to refer back to that. And again, a recording of today's webinar will be archived within 48 hours to our YouTube channel, and you can access that on the event page. We would also like to welcome you to invite you to our upcoming webinar on Wednesday, November 18th around creating safe pathways, employment advocacy for military spouses in crisis. This session will delve into the role of employment as a protective factor for military families impacted by family violence and domestic abuse. This session is designed to equip military service providers with the knowledge and tools needed to effectively support those families. We also encourage you to check out our new on-demand webinar, Military Children's Family Relationships. This dives a bit more into that military children's experiences and what those relationships look like regarding military service, how that really shapes those families and children's relationships. So we invite you to that page. That webinar is actually available now for on-demand viewing. And lastly, thank you all so much again for joining us and for engaging in the chat and for sharing your resources as well. We appreciate those resources that y'all shared. Be sure to visit our website at oneop.org to explore upcoming events, articles, resources, and more. And you can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We'll stick around for just one more moment to grab any last links. But again, please refer back to the event page. The slides have all of the information. And if you need to follow up with us, and contact us for any further assistance. Thank you all again so much. And thank you, Nikki and Curtis, for this wonderful comprehensive session. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.